This is a screen no IT professional wants to see, a 72-hour countdown timer indicating a system lockdown. The machine is infected with CryptoLocker. It encrypted files using an RSA 2048 public key, demanding $300 to release the private decryption key. For a junior technician, the immediate response is entirely tactical. They isolate the machine from the network, wipe the hard drives, and attempt to restore operations from the most recent offline backups. At the executive level, however, the scope shifts immediately. The moment that countdown started, the organization's legal and financial liabilities began to expand, moving the event from a server room problem to a boardroom crisis. A breach of this scale immediately triggers up to 5 distinct types of investigations: internal administrative reviews, criminal probes by law enforcement, civil lawsuits from affected parties, regulatory audits, and industry-standard compliance checks. The security function exists to translate technical facts into business risk and legal liability. It provides the essential framework for managing a crisis after technical defenses fail. To understand the true impact of this infection, we have to map its blast radius. That requires tracing the failure through threat modeling, risk architecture, legal compliance, and ultimately business continuity planning. While the initial infection point is purely technical, resolving the crisis is entirely governed by business and legal frameworks. Every security evaluation begins with the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. These pillars form the baseline for protecting information. Ransomware is a direct violation of availability. The data exists and its contents haven't been altered, but the organization is denied access to its assets. To understand how an attacker shatters that pillar, security professionals use threat modeling. This is a systematic process for identifying and categorizing the specific methods an adversary might use to bypass network defenses. The industry standard for this process is the STRIDE model, an acronym that categorizes 6 specific types of attacker actions. The S stands for spoofing. In many ransomware cases, the attacker first gains a foothold into the network by spoofing a legitimate identity, often through a phishing email that tricks a user into handing over their credentials. However, a standard user account rarely has the permissions required to encrypt an entire server array. The attacker must execute secondary exploits to escalate their access. In the STRIDE model, this is called elevation of privilege. By exploiting a system vulnerability, the attacker elevates that normal user account to secure administrative rights, giving them total control over the environment. The model also accounts for repudiation, the attacker's ability to cover their tracks and delete logs, allowing them to deny they ever performed the malicious actions. This technical attack succeeded because the organization failed to systematically model these threats and apply the necessary access controls to stop them. When we shift our perspective from the attacker's methodology to the organization's defensive planning, we find the root of the failure. Every organization operates with inherent risk. This is the baseline danger of a malware infection existing on a network before a single security control or policy is ever applied. To manage this, companies deploy technical controls, like intrusion prevention systems, specifically designed to block network attacks and lower that baseline danger. The danger that remains after those controls are implemented is called residual risk. A successful ransomware infection means the organization's calculated residual risk has suddenly become a realized threat. This is a diagram of the NIST risk management framework. It illustrates the continuous life cycle required to secure an information system. The NIST cycle follows a sequence: categorize, select, and implement. However, this specific implementation reveals an omission in the defensive strategy. The question mark identifies the assess step. The organization implemented defenses but failed to verify if those defenses could resist a breach. An unassessed control provides only a false sense of security. When facing risk, management has 4 response behaviors to choose from: accept, transfer, reduce, or reject. Because they failed to assess their internal controls, their last line of defense is likely relying on cybersecurity breach insurance, a mechanism designed to transfer the financial risk to a third party. Failing to assess security controls effectively transforms a manageable residual risk into a catastrophic business failure. Once the internal technical failure is complete, the outward shockwave begins. Data encryption instantly converts technical downtime into massive legal exposure. The immediate legal liability is determined by answering one specific question: what exact classification of data was held on those locked servers? This binder represents the General Data Protection Regulation. If the encrypted servers processed personal information for citizens in the European Union, this regulation immediately dictates the organization's required response. The GDPR includes mandates like the right to erasure, allowing individuals to demand their data be permanently deleted. If ransomware has locked the system or corrupted the backups, the organization is physically unable to comply with these legal requests. If compromised servers contain patient records, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, takes precedence, triggering strict federal notification requirements and potential fines. However, this only applies to covered entities like healthcare providers or insurance clearinghouses. A consumer health app developer, for example, would not automatically be subject to these exact privacy requirements, altering the legal strategy. The risk shifts entirely if the data stolen and encrypted isn't personal but proprietary, like a manufacturing process for microprocessors. This logo, for example, is protected by a trademark, signifying a brand identity, but a proprietary manufacturing process is legally classified as a trade secret, requiring different protections to prevent unauthorized use by a competitor. If an attacker extracts that trade secret, the organization must pursue civil litigation under specific federal laws, like the Economic Espionage Act. The legal system evaluates a breach through a highly specific lens. It focuses heavily on the level of due care the organization applied to the specific types of data they were holding. To survive this legal and operational pressure, leadership must turn to the physical reality of the Business Continuity Plan, or BCP. Effective continuity planning begins with asset valuation. The team must calculate the financial worth of the data sitting on the servers to determine if recovering it is economically viable. The key metric here is replacement cost. The organization must measure the financial cost of rebuilding the entire data center from scratch against the cost of the ransom or the revenue lost to downtime. A common operational failure occurs when organizations mistake local hardware redundancy for actual disaster recovery. Implementing a RAID array, for example, provides fault tolerance if a single hard drive fails. It does nothing to protect against ransomware encrypting the entire volume. True business continuity requires off-site backups or relocating operations to an alternate cold site. The plan is governed by metrics like the Recovery Point Objective, or RPO. This dictates the maximum amount of acceptable data loss, determining exactly how frequently those off-site backups must be scheduled. Because it allocates physical resources and dictates operational survival, the final approval for a business continuity plan does not belong to the IT department. It rests squarely with the Chief Executive Officer. The BCP serves as the final bridge, pulling the organization out of a technical failure and returning it to operational continuity. When we stack these layers together, the true nature of information security becomes clear. The incident begins at the technical layer, is managed by the risk framework, and is ultimately judged by the legal and continuity layers above it. A motivated attacker can eventually bypass a technical control, but a professional governance framework ensures the business itself is not destroyed in the process. This requires due diligence, the exhaustive act of researching, auditing, and fully understanding the unique risks facing your organization's specific assets. Diligence must then be followed by due care. This is the legal principle requiring you to act on that knowledge, implementing the standard of security that any reasonable person would expect under the circumstances. When the inevitable administrative or civil investigation occurs, the burden of proof rests on a preponderance of the evidence. The organization must possess the documentation to prove they applied due care. The mandate of a security leader is not to build a perfectly unhackable system. It is to guarantee that when an incident occurs, the organization can prove its resilience, defend its actions, and survive the blast radius.